Hello everyone, my name's Dan Fossard and I'm going to read for you today out of my favourite book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. If you don't own a copy of this, I'd strongly suggest that you get one. You know, there's over 50 million been sold worldwide. It's incredible, it's like the mother of all self-help development books. And what I'm going to do in this video series, I've just decided that I'm going to read a chapter out loud in every video. There's 16 chapters, that's 16 videos. There's actually a chapter in this book about auto-suggestion, which basically means that you read out loud. When you read out loud, you're not only looking at the words, you're reading them and you're listening to them and you're speaking them at the same time. So you the information is going into your brain in like so much more ways than if you just read it in your head. So here we go, the first of 16 chapters of Think and Grow Rich. I'm not going to read them all in one video, obviously. I'm going to record 16 separate videos, 16 separate chapters. You know, this book is available on YouTube, the audio of it. I just thought I'd make some for myself, you know, so I can play them back and I can listen to the audio. And also I can just read the book again because I love this book. And what better way to read it than to record yourself doing it and be able to share it with everyone. Hope you get a lot of value out of this. And if you've never read this book, you're in for a treat. Chapter 1, The Power of Thought. The man who thought his way to partnership with Thomas A. Edison. Truly, thoughts are things, and powerful things at that, when mixed with purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other objects. Edwin C. Barnes discovered how true it is that men really do think and grow rich. His discovery did not come about at one sitting. It came little by little, beginning with a burning desire to become a business associate of the great Thomas Edison. One of the chief characteristics of Barnes' desire was that it was definite. He wanted to work with Edison, not for him. Observe carefully the description of how he went about translating his desire into reality, and you will have a better understanding of the 13 principles which lead to riches. When this desire or impulse of thought first flashed into his mind, he was in no position to act upon it. Two difficulties stood in his way. He didn't know Mr. Edison, and he didn't have enough money to pay for his rail fare to New Jersey. These difficulties were sufficient to have discouraged the majority of people from making any attempt to carry them out. But his desire was not ordinary. He was so determined to find a way to carry out this desire that he finally decided to travel by blind baggage rather than be defeated. To the uninitiated, this means that he went to New Jersey on a freight train. He presented himself at Mr. Edison's laboratory and announced that he had come to go into business with the inventor. In speaking of that first meeting between them years later, Mr. Edison said, "He stood there before me looking like an ordinary tramp, but there was something in the expression of his face which conveyed the impression that he was determined to get what he'd come after. I'd learned from years of experience with men that when a man really desires something so deeply, he's willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel in order to get it, he's sure to win. I gave him the opportunity he asked for, because I saw he had made up his mind to stand by until he'd succeeded. Subsequent events proved that no mistake was made." Just what young Barnes said to Mr. Edison on that occasion was far less important than what he thought. Edison himself said, It could not have been the young man's appearance that got him his start at Edison's office, for that was definitely against him. It was what he thought that counted. If the significance of that statement could be conveyed to every person who read it, there would be no need for the remainder of this book. Barnes did not get his partnership with Edison on his first interview. He did get a chance to work in the Edison offices at a very nominal wage, doing work that was unimportant to Edison, but most important to Barnes. It gave him an opportunity to display his merchandise where his intended partner could see it. Months went by. Apparently nothing happened to bring the coveted goal which Barnes had set up in his mind as definite, but something more important happened. He was constantly intensifying his desire to become the business associate of Edison. Psychologists have correctly said, when one is truly ready for a thing, it puts in an appearance. Barnes was ready for a business association with Edison. Moreover, he was determined to remain ready until he had got what he was seeking. He did not say to himself, "Oh well, what's the use? I guess I'll change my mind and try a salesman's job." But he did say, "I came here to go into business with Edison, and I'll accomplish this till the end if it takes the remainder of my life." He meant it. What a different story people tell would have only have been to adopt a definite purpose and stand by that purpose until it had become an all-consuming obsession. Maybe young Barnes did not know it at the time, but his bulldog determination, his persistence with a single desire, was destined to mow down all opposition and bring him to the opportunity he was seeking. When the opportunity came, it appeared in a different form, and from a different direction that Barnes had expected. That is one of the tricks of opportunity. It has a sly habit of slipping in the back door, and often comes disguised in a form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Perhaps this is why so many fail to recognise opportunity. Mr. Edison had just perfected a new device known at the time as the Edison dictating machine, later called the Ediphone. His salesmen were not enthusiastic over the machine. They did not believe it could be sold without great effort. Barnes saw his opportunity. It had crawled in quietly, and in that queer-looking machine it interested no one but Barnes and the inventor. He knew he could sell his dictating machine. He suggested this to Edison and promptly got a chance. He did sell the machine. In fact, he sold it so successfully that Edison gave him a contract to distribute it all over the market, all over the nation. Out of that business association grew the slogan, "Made by Edison, installed by Barnes." This business alliance made Barnes rich in money, but he accomplished something infinitely greater. He proved that one really may think and grow rich. How much actual cash that original desire of Barnes was worth to him, I have no way of knowing. Perhaps it brought him $2 or $3 million. Whatever the amount, it becomes insignificant when compared with the greater asset he acquired, the definite knowledge that an intangible impulse of thought can be transmuted into its physical counterpart by the application of known principles. Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison. He thought himself into a fortune. He had nothing to start with, except the capacity to know what he wanted, and the determination to stand by the desire until he had realised it. He had no money to begin with. He had but little education. He had no influence, but he did have initiative, faith, and the will to win. With these intangible forces, he made himself #1 man with the greatest inventor who ever lived. Now, let's look at a different situation and study a man who has plenty of tangible evidence of riches, but lost it because he stopped 3 feet short of the goal he was seeking. 3 feet from gold. One of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. Every person is guilty of that mistake at one time or another. Mr. Darby, who later became one of the world's most successful insurance salesmen in the country, tells a story of his uncle who was caught by the gold fever in the gold rush days and went on to dig and grow rich. He had never heard of the saying that more gold had been mined from the brains of men than had ever been taken from the earth. He staked a claim and went to work with a pick and a shovel. The going was hard, but his lust for gold was definite. After weeks of labour, he was rewarded by the discovery of the shining ore. He needed machinery to bring the ore to the surface. Quietly, he covered up the mine, retraced his footsteps to his home in Williamsburg, Maryland, and told his relatives and a few neighbours of the strike. They got together the money for the machinery needed and had it shipped. The uncle and Darby went back to work on the mine. The first car of ore was mined and shipped to a smelter. The returns proved they had one of the richest mines in Colorado. A few more cars of that ore would clear the debts. Then would come the big killings and profits. Down went the drills, and up went the hopes of Darby and his uncle. Then something happened. The vein of gold ore disappeared. They had come to the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold was no longer there. They drilled on, desperately trying to pick up the vein again, but all to no avail. Finally, they decided to quit. They sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s, and then took the train back to home. Now, some junk men are not dumb. He called in his mining engineer to have a look at the mine and do a little calculation. The engineer advised that the project had failed because the owners were not familiar with fault lines. His calculations showed that the vein was to be found just 3 feet from where the men had stopped drilling, and that is exactly where they found it. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counsel before giving up. Most of the money which went into the machinery was procured through the efforts of Mr. Darby, who was then a very young man. The money came from his relatives and neighbours because of their faith in him. He paid back every dollar of it, although he was years in doing so. Long afterwards, Mr. Darby recouped his loss many times over when he made the discovery that desire can be transmuted into gold. The discovery came after he went into business of selling life insurance. Remembering that he'd lost a fortune because he'd stopped 3 feet from gold, Darby profited by the experience in his chosen work. His simple method was to say to himself, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I'll never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy insurance. He owes his stickability to the lessons he learned from his acquittability in the gold mine business. Before success comes to most people, they are sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When faced with defeat, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit, and that's exactly what the majority of people do. More than 500 of the most successful people in America told the author that their great success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Failure is a trickster with a keen sense of irony and cunning. It takes great delight in tripping one up when the success is almost out of reach. A 50-cent lesson in persistence. Shortly after Mr. Darby received his degree from the University of Hard Knocks, he had decided to profit by his experience in the gold mining business. He had the good fortune to be present on an occasion that proved to him that no does not necessarily mean no. One afternoon, he was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old-fashioned mill. The uncle operated a large farm on which a number of sharecrop farmers lived. Quietly, the door opened and a small child, the daughter of a tenant, walked in and took her place near the door. The uncle looked up, saw the child and barked at her roughly, "What do you want?" Meekly the child replied, "My mammy says send her 50 cents. "I'll not do it," the uncle retorted. "Now run on home." "Yes, sir," the child replied, but she didn't move. The uncle went ahead with his work, so busy, engaged, that he did not notice that the child had not left. When he looked up again and saw her still standing there, he yelled at her, "I told you to go on home. Now go, or I'll take the switch to you." The little girl said, "Yes, sir," but didn't budge an inch. The uncle dropped a sack of grain he was about to pour into the mill hopper, picked up a barrel stave and started towards the child with an expression of his face that indicated trouble. Darby held his breath. He was certain he was about to witness a murder. He knew his uncle had a fierce temper. When he reached the spot where the child was standing, she quickly stepped forward and looked into his eyes and screamed at the top of her voice, "My mummy's got to have that 50 cents. The uncle stopped, looked at her for a minute, and slowly laid down the barrel stave on the floor, put his hand in his pocket, took out $50 and gave it to her. The child took the money and slowly backed out of the door, never taking her eyes off the man whom she had just conquered. After she had gone, the uncle sat down on a box and looked out of the window for 10 minutes. He was pondering with awe on the whipping he had just taken. Mr. Darby, too, was doing some thinking. That was the first time in all his experience he'd seen a child of the sharecropper deliberately master an adult authority figure. How did she do it? What happened to his uncle that caused him to lose his fierceness and become as docile as a lamb? What strange power did this child use that made her the master of her superior? These and other similar questions flashed into Darby's mind, but he did not find the answer until years later when he told me that story. Strangely, the story of this unusual experience was told to the author of The Old Mill, on the very spot where the uncle took his whipping. As we stood there in that dusty old mill, Mr. Darby repeated the story of the unusual conquest, and finished by asking, "What can you make of it? What strange power did that child use that so completely whipped my uncle?" The answer to this question will be found in the principles described in this book. The answer is full and complete. It contains details and instructions sufficient to enable anyone to understand and apply the same force that the little child had accidentally stumbled upon. Keep your mind alert and you will observe exactly what strange power came to rescue of that child. You will catch a glimpse of this power in the next chapter. Somewhere in the book you will find an idea that will quicken your receptive powers and place at your command for your own benefit that same irresistible power. The awareness of this power may come to you in the first chapter, or it may flash into your mind in some subsequent chapter. It may come in the form of a single idea, or it may come in the form of nature or a plan or a purpose. Again, it may cause you to go back to your past experience of failure and defeat and bring to the surface some lesson by which you can regain all that you lost through defeat. After I described to you, Mr. Darby, the power unwittingly used by that little child, he quickly retraced his 30 years of experience as a life insurance salesman. He frankly acknowledged that this led to his success in the field was due to, in no small degree, the lesson he had learned from that child. Mr. Darby pointed out, every time a prospect tried to bow me out without buying, I saw that child standing there in front of the old mill, the big eyes glaring in my defiance, and I said to myself, I've got to make this sale. The better portion of all sales I've made were after people had said no. He recalled too his mistake of having stopped only 3 feet from gold. But, he said, the experience was a blessing in disguise. It taught me to keep on keeping on, no matter how hard the going may be, a lesson I needed to learn before I could succeed in anything. This story of Mr. Darby and his uncle, the sharecropper's child and the gold mine, will doubtlessly be read by hundreds of people who make their living by selling life insurance. To all these, the author wishes to offer the suggestion that Darby owes to these 2 experiences his ability to sell more than $1 million of life insurance every year. Life is strange and often imponderable. Both the success and failures have their roots in simple experiences. Mr. Darby's experiences were commonplace and simple enough, yet as they held the answer to his destiny in life, they were as important to him as life itself. He profited by these 2 dramatic experiences because he analysed them and found the lessons they taught. But what of the person who has neither the time nor the inclination to study failure in search of knowledge that may lead to success? Where and how are they going to learn the art of converting defeat into stepping stones to opportunity? In answer to these questions, this book was written. The answer called for 13 principles. However, remember as you read that the answer you may be seeking to the questions which have caused you to ponder over the strangeness of life may be found in your own mind. Some idea, plan or purpose may spring to your mind as you read. One sound idea is all you need to achieve success. The principles described in this book contain the best and most practical way and means of creating useful ideas. Before we go any further in our approach to the description of these principles, we believe you are entitled to receive something important. When riches begin to come, they come so quickly and in such great abundance that one wonders where they have been hiding through all these years. I'm going to read that again. When riches begin to come, they come so quickly and in such great abundance that one wonders where they have been hiding during all these years. This is an astounding statement, and all the more so when we take into consideration the popular belief that riches come only to those who work hard and long. When you begin to think and grow rich, you will observe that riches begin with the state of mind, with definiteness of purpose, with little or no hard work. You and every other person ought to be interested in knowing how to acquire a state of mind that will attract riches. I spent 25 years in research analysing more than 25,000 people because I too wanted to know how wealthy men became that way. Without the research, this book could not have been written. Here, take notice of a very significant truth. The business depression started in 1929 and continued on an all-time record of destruction until sometime after President Roosevelt entered the office. Then the depression began to fade away into nothingness, just as an electrician in a theatre raises a light so gradually that darkness is transmuted into light before you realise it. And so did the spell of the fear of minds of the people gradually fade away and become faith. As soon as you master the principles of this philosophy and begin to follow the instructions for applying those principles, your financial status will begin to improve. Everything you touch will be transmuted into itself an asset for your benefit. Impossible? Not at all. One of the main weaknesses of mankind is the average person's familiarity with the word impossible. He knows all the rules that will not work. He knows all the things that can't be done. This book was written for those who seek the rules and have made others successful and are willing to stake everything on those rules. A great many years ago, I purchased a dictionary. The first thing I did was turn to the word impossible and cut it out of the book. That would not be an unwise thing for you to do. Success comes to those who become success conscious. And failure comes to those who indifferently allow themselves to become failure conscious. The object of this book is to help all those who seek it learn the art of changing their minds from failure conscious to success conscious. Another weakness found in altogether too many people is the habit of measuring everything and everyone by their own impressions and beliefs. Some who read this book will believe that no one can think and grow rich. They cannot think in terms of riches because their own thoughts and habits have been steeped in poverty, want, misery, failure and defeat. Millions of people look at the achievements of Henry Ford and envy him and his good fortune, or luck, or genius, or whatever it is they credit it with his fortune. Perhaps one person every 100,000 knows the secret, and those who do know are too modest or reluctant to speak of it because of its simplicity. A single transaction will illustrate the word secretly imperfectly. When Ford decided to produce his now famous V8 motor, he chose to build an engine with the entire 8 cylinders cast in one block. He instructed his engineers to produce a design for that engine. The design was placed on paper, but the engineers believed it was simply impossible to cast all 8 cylinders of a gas engine block in one piece. Ford said, "Well, produce it anyway." But they said, "It's impossible." "Go ahead," Ford said, "and stay on the job till you've finished, no matter how long it takes." The engineers went ahead. There was no other option if they were to remain on the Ford staff. 6 months went by and still nothing happened. Another 6 months passed and still nothing. The engineer tried every single conceivable plan to carry out the orders, but the thing seemed out of the question. It was impossible. At the end of the year, Ford checked with his engineers, and again they informed him that they had found no way out of carrying his orders. "Go ahead," he said. "I want it, therefore I'll have it." They went ahead, and then, as if by a stroke of magic, the secret was discovered. The Ford determination had won once more. This story may not be described within minute accuracy, but the sum of the substance of it is correct. Deduce from it who you think you wish to grow. The secret of the Ford millions, if you can, you will not have to look very far. Henry Ford is a success because he understands and applies the principles of success. One of those desires is knowing what you want. Remember the story from Ford as you read, and pick out the lines for which are the secret of his stupendous achievement. If you can do this, you can lay your finger on a particular group of principles that made Henry Ford rich. You can equal his achievements at almost any calling which was suited. You are the master of your fate and the captain of your soul. When the English poet W.C. Henley wrote the poetic lines, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul," he should have informed us that the reason we are the masters of our fate and the captains of our soul is because we have the power to control our thoughts. He should have told us that the ether in which this little planet floats, in which we move and have our being, is a form of energy moving at an inconceivably high rate of vibration, and that the ether is filled with a form of universal power which adapts itself into the nature of the thoughts we hold in our minds, and influences us in natural ways to transmute our thoughts into the physical equivalent. If the poet had told us this great truth, we would know why it is that we are the masters of our fate and the captains of our soul. He should have told us with great emphasis that this power makes no attempt to discriminate between destructive and constructive thoughts, that it will urge us to translate into physical reality thoughts of poverty just as it quickly will influence us to act upon thoughts of riches. He should have told us too that our brains become magnetized with dominating thoughts we hold in our minds. By means with which no one is familiar, these magnets attract us to the forces, the people, the circumstances of life which harmonize with the nature of our dominating thoughts. He should have told us before that we can accumulate riches in great abundance. We must magnetize our minds with intense desire for riches, that we must become money conscious, until the desire for money drives us to create definite plans for acquiring it. But being a poet and not a philosopher, Henley contented himself by stating a great truth in poetic form, leaving those who followed him to interpret the philosophical meaning of his lines. Little by little, the truth has unfolded itself, until now appears certain that the principles described in this book hold the secret of mastery over our economic fate. We are now ready to examine the first of these principles. Maintain a spirit of open-mindedness. Remember that as you read, they are the invention of no single person. The principles were gathered from life experiences of more than 500 men who actually accumulated riches in huge amounts. Men who began in poverty with little education or influence. The principles worked for these men, and you can put them to work for your own benefit. You will find it easy, not hard, to do. Before you read the next chapter, I want you to know that it conveys factual information that might easily change your entire financial destiny, as it has so definitely brought changes of stupendous proportions to two people described. I want you to know also that the relationship between these two men and myself is such that I could have taken no liberties with the facts, even if I'd wished to do so. One of them is my closest personal friend of almost 25 years, and the other is my own son. The unusual success of both these men, such generously accredited to the principles described in the next chapter, more than justifies the personal preference as a means of emphasising this far-flung power of this principle. That, my friends, was chapter 1 of Think and Grow Rich. Thanks very much. I'll see you in the next chapter. See ya.